When do we get Yahusha's inheritance? When do we get to experience that? When do we come into our inheritance? Do we get it now? Or do we have to wait until Yahusha comes back? Do we have to just go through trial and torture and persecution and pressure and tribulation until the very end? Until Yahusha arrives? Or can we have our inheritance now? That's the question. Chew on that. We're going to talk about inheritance today, brothers and sisters, because as with Joshua, is going to be with us in the end. Joshua had to embark on a set-apart war to take back the land that Yahusha had declared is his. Yahusha has declared that we are his. And so we are embarking on a battle now to take back the promised land, get all the filthy little claws out of us, and spots and wrinkles and blemishes and evil behavior out of us to behave a certain way. Let's talk about inheritance today. We're coming to our last couple of videos now in Joshua, starting to tie it all up. Inheritance, you can see it in the faint red writing there. Inheritance. We're going to cover 5 chapters today, guys. Like I said in our last episode, I'm in super summarization mode now, and it's all names and places and borders and boundaries. So we're skimming right through it and pulling out all the gems and juicy bits that we need to know for today. Before we go into it though, I want to talk about this. Genealogy or obedience? What is Yahusha looking for? Genealogy, where you come from, your bloodline, your ancestry, or obedience? Yahusha gave a section of the promised land to a person of foreign origin. Got that? Yahusha gave a portion of the promised land to a person of foreign origin. Caleb was in the line of Kenaz, a line from Edom, which was Esau. Caleb had been brought into the tribe of Judah for sure. And we know this from the book of Numbers as we hear the story of the 12 spies who go out to scout out the land of Canaan for Moses. But we see that the issue of receiving an inheritance from Yahusha, the Elohim of Israel, was much less about family and genealogy than it was about obedience to him. Caleb was the perfect example of those who had received the land from Yahusha. But he would also be a reminder to future generations of Israelites who would lose the land because they followed the ways of Solomon. Solomon, who was disobedient to Yahusha and had great lusts for personal wealth and power, and so he led the life of an internationalist. He went to foreign lands, brought home foreign wives, and permitted foreign ways and deities to be brought into Israel. This behavior lit the pathway to Israel's future destruction due to their rebellion against Yahusha. I mean, he didn't cause all the rebellion, but he certainly encouraged them in that direction. I mean, the rebellion's never really stopped. The idolatry's never really stopped, has it? Since the beginning of time. But Solomon was a big catalyst in accepting it. So, what was the point of that? Yahusha's into obedience. It doesn't matter where you come from. Bloodline, ancestry, male, female, black, white, old, young, doesn't matter who you are. If you are willing to graft into Israel through repentance and immersion in his only name, whereby there is deliverance, and put off all the idolatry and come into his commonwealth, then you are part of the family and you have an inheritance. So let's go into chapter 15. Judah's land. So Joshua told the tribe of Judah the boundaries of their promised land inheritance, and they all lived within their borders. However, the Jebusites lived in Jerusalem, and the people of Judah were unable to capture the city and get rid of them. And that's why Jebusites still live in Jerusalem, along with the people of Judah. Now, obviously, this was written before the time of King David, because he went ahead and solved a lot of those problems, kicked a lot of them out. But Judah was to be a larger territory because it was a larger tribe. If you look down here, Judah is pretty large, isn't it? Because they have a large tribe. And we're going to come into that in a minute, why that is. So, and Joshua gave Caleb some land among the people of Judah, as Yahusha had told him to. Caleb's share was Hebron. So Caleb attacked it and forced the 3 Anakim clans out. Then he started a war with the town of Debir, telling his men, the man who captures this town can marry my daughter, Achsah. And Caleb's nephew, Othniel, captured Debir. Anyway, Caleb's nephew captured Debir, and Caleb let him marry his daughter Achsah. Perfectly ethical and helped strengthen the clan. Right after the wedding, Achsah started telling Othniel that he ought to ask her father for a field. So she went to her father, and while she was getting down from her donkey, Caleb asked her, "What's up, my girl? Something bothering you?" "I really need your help," she said. "The land you gave me is in the southern desert, so I really need some spring-fed ponds for water supply." So Caleb gave her a couple of small ponds named higher ponds and lower ponds. And that was that. So you can see here that was Judah's land in there. Pretty big compared to the other tribes. There's another map here. Look at all the different tribes. Manasseh seems to be the biggest one, doesn't it? Because there's 2 of them. One on the west, one on the east and one on the west. So they're huge, Manasseh, aren't they? Ephraim's pretty big. Israel's huge. Judah. Judah is huge. So let's go into Ephraim's land. Ephraim and Manasseh are the 2 tribes descended from Joseph. They're Joseph's boys, remember? Ephraim and Manasseh are the 2 tribes descended from Joseph, and Joshua gave them a description of the land borders that they were inheriting. And Ephraim lived within their territory and also had some towns and villages that were inside Manasseh's tribal land too. Ephraim could not force the Canaanites out of Gezer, so there are still some Canaanites who live there among the Israelites. But now these Canaanites have to work as slaves for the Israelites. And if we look at the map, we see that not only did Manasseh get one territory on the east side of the Jordan River, but another separate and distinct territory on the west side of the Jordan too. But that both these territories were quite large. Got that? It's not only the fact that they got some here and some here. Both of them are huge. I mean, just one of them is bigger than most of the other tribes, and they got 2 of them. Why? So both these territories were quite large in relation to what the other tribes received. In Yahusha's amazing provision, Manasseh still received a double portion that a firstborn is normally entitled to, even though Yahusha, for his own sovereign reasons, supernaturally instructed Jacob to switch the birthrights of Ephraim and Manasseh. What on earth did that mean? Well, we're going to talk about the 2 most important tribes now. And remember, Ephraim and Manasseh are Joseph's boys, and Manasseh was the oldest. So the oldest should get the firstborn, the birthright and the blessing. There were 2 parts. Let's go into this. Because we see, keep this in mind, that even though Jacob crossed his hands over on his grandsons and adopted them as his own sons, as tribes, almost like making them Joseph's brothers, he made Ephraim the firstborn. But look, Manasseh still came out on top. Look at this. Keep that in mind. 2 important tribes, the firstborn, birthright and blessing. These chapters that we're in, chapters 15 to 17, cover the giving of land on the west side of the Jordan to the 2 most important of the 12 tribes, Judah and then Ephraim, but also Manasseh. In fact, in a more technical sense, the 2 tribes of most importance were Judah and Joseph. The 2 tribes of most importance were Judah and Joseph. But Ephraim and Manasseh, for some divine reason, would take the place of the tribe of Joseph for a time. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, why would Judah and Joseph be Jacob's? Why would Judah and Joseph be Jacob's? favorite two sons. Because you're only supposed to have one firstborn, aren't you? Come down, I think I put it down here somewhere. Where is it? Have a look here. These are all, not in age order, but these are all Jacob's sons. These are the 12 tribes of Israel. Got it? Now, the oldest here, Reuben, was shacking up, and getting onto the Bilhah, I think it was, his servant wife, Jacob's servant wife. He slept with his father's servant wife, so he was pretty much kicked out of the inheritance. He got only a small piece of land. Simeon and Levi, these two went on the barbaric bloodbath in Shechem, remember, to avenge their daughter Dinah, their sister Dinah. So then who's next in line? Forget these two here because they're over here. They're not in the right, this is not the right age order. Reuben was the oldest, then Simeon, then Levi, then who was next in line? Judah. And even though Judah had gone off and had his own adventures and had his own children who weren't believers and they were outside the bloodline and all this sort of stuff, and we had the story of Tamar, who look at this, Tamar was where the Messiah come through, interestingly enough. This was all part of Yahusha's plan, of course. So Judah came good at the end. He was obedient. He was the one who really fought to get Benjamin. Not doing the names too good today, am I? He was the one who fought to get Benjamin back to his father when they were in Egypt. Remember when Joseph hadn't revealed himself? Judah fought for Benjamin and really pleaded with Joseph. He didn't know who Joseph was at the time. So this is the firstborn. He got given the firstborn. But if you look at it, Jacob had all these sons, but he only had one favourite wife, and his favourite wife was Rachel, and Rachel only had two boys, Joseph and Benjamin. So if you were to bypass all the sons of Leah and Bilhah and Milcah, the servant wives, you've only got Joseph and Benjamin left. And who was the eldest? Joseph. So it's interesting that the two boys that got an inheritance were Judah and Joseph. See this? And Manasseh and Ephraim were Joseph's boys. And Judah was Leah's boy. And the scepter, the royal line came through this here. Let's go back up here because my mind's all going to mush. Let's go back up here to the two most important tribes. The two most important tribes were Judah and Joseph. We just covered that. That's why they were the favourite sons. But Ephraim and Manasseh, for some divine reason, would take the place of the tribe of Joseph for a time. So Joseph was almost replaced. He was taken out. There's no tribe of Joseph, is there? There's Ephraim and Manasseh instead. So it's interesting. Interesting. Let's read about it, because my mind's obviously not working today. So let's read about it. Every firstborn son received both the birthright and the blessing. Every firstborn son received both the birthright and the blessing. It was inheritance with two parts. Remember, this is really exciting to me because it's going right back to Jacob and Esau and what Jacob stole from Esau. He not only tricked him out of the birthright, sold it away because his brother was so hungry and war-torn, and I'll only give you some of my soup, some of my broth if you give me your birthright. And then later on he deceived Isaac and got the blessing as well. This is what Jacob stole from his brother. All in the plan though. The birthright was the authority to rule as the head over the whole family and any clans after the father dies. So you got the authority. The birthright is the authority. And the blessing, each child, after the father died, each child received some of the father's wealth after he died. However, the oldest got a double portion. Now, what is wealth back here? Wealth is people. Wealth is livestock. Wealth is land. Okay? Wealth. So have a look here. This was all supposed to go to Esau, but Jacob received it. And if you look at Joseph's sons, the oldest was Manasseh. He was supposed to get all this, the birthright and the blessing. Anyway, why Judah and Ephraim? Why Judah and Ephraim? Because Jacob's deathbed blessing upon his sons the 12 tribes of Israel, split the traditional firstborn blessing into two parts. On your deathbed, you're only supposed to give the firstborn blessing, the birthright, you've already got the birthright, the blessing to your eldest son. But this is why Jacob, he did some really bizarre stuff on his deathbed. He split the traditional firstborn blessing into two parts. One part going to Ephraim and the other to Judah. One part going to Ephraim and the other part to Judah. The way that leadership, control, power and wealth was passed down within the tribes of Israel was by means of a ceremony and formal legal act called the firstborn blessing. This concept was not at all unique for the Hebrews. It was fairly standard within all tribal societies, and to a large degree remains so to this day. The concept of the firstborn blessing was powerful and generally not alterable once it was made. Remember that? Esau pleaded with Isaac after they'd realized the trickery. He pleaded with his father, please give me your blessing. And Isaac said, I can't, I've already given it. See how orally charged, see how much the spoken word was important. It was like a legal binding agreement. So this was just normal in this custom. It was not alterable once. It was also accepted as fully enforceable as any of the best contracts that the most expensive of today's attorneys could possibly fashion. So this was a legal thing. So as we discussed up in the picture, the firstborn blessing consisted of two parts. The double portion blessing and the transference of ruling authority. So you didn't just get an equal share with the rest of your brothers of your father's wealth, you got a double portion. You got double it because you were the eldest. And you also were the ruling authority. You were the ruling tribe, clan I should say, you were the ruling clan within your tribe. The double portion blessing therefore involved wealth and material blessing, while the transference of ruling authority dealt with inheritance of tribal leadership. The two basic parts of the firstborn blessing were invariably linked together, and the same person received both. It was the firstborn who received all of it, always, except here on Jacob's deathbed. He did something really bizarre. He split the firstborn blessing into two parts. But something strange and important happened early in Hebrew history. When Jacob split the firstborn blessing, he gave one part to Judah and the other part to Ephraim. He gave one part to Judah and the other part to Ephraim. Jacob handed over the leadership of the tribe of Israel to Judah. Got that? He handed over the authority to be the ruling tribe. He handed that over to Judah. And the double portion blessing of wealth and material blessing, he gave to Ephraim. That doesn't sound so difficult to comprehend, does it? But wait, it gets a little bit more complicated than that. In fact, even though the name Ephraim is used to describe the person who received Jacob's tribal wealth, in reality, it was Joseph who was the inheritor. Remember, Joseph was Ephraim's father. Getting all this? Ephraim and Manasseh are like names, holding Joseph's name. They've been replacing Joseph's name for a while in history, and they come back later on in the scriptures. But remember weeks before his death when Jacob wanted to bless Joseph's boys? In this blessing of his grandchildren, Jacob not only bestowed greater status upon Ephraim, the younger, he also legally adopted both of his grandchildren away from Joseph. He changed the status of his grandchildren to sons, and in doing so, he removed Joseph as a tribal ancestor by name. There's no tribe of Joseph, is there? It's Ephraim and Manasseh. So he removed Joseph as a tribal ancestor by name and replaced him with Joseph's two sons, who were now legally Joseph's brothers, Ephraim and Manasseh. Wow, see how bizarre this was? Now, while to us, this may sound like some kind of weird, archaic punishment upon Joseph, in fact, it was the opposite. Because you'd be standing there going, hang on, you just disowned me as a son by name and adopted my two sons. have I done wrong? So it might sound like a punishment to us, but in fact it was the opposite. It was a blessing for him, because in an instant, Joseph became not one, but two tribes. The newly formed tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. Joseph doubled. It's like Jacob's doing some shifty, like a lawyer would do, an attorney. He's doing something shifty. I've worked out a way you can get a double inheritance. I'm just going to disown you and adopt your children as my sons, and then those two sons will get an equal inheritance, which means you, Joseph, have now doubled your inheritance. Getting this? So Joseph just doubled through this. Not only that, but the scriptures explained that these two new tribes would go forward in the These two tribes would go forward in the name of Joseph. So Ephraim and Manasseh would go forward in the name of Joseph. So the name of Joseph has been removed, but they're like standing in his place, sort of thing. Effectively, Ephraim and Manasseh would be as placeholders in history. That's the phrase I was trying to grab before. They were placeholders in history, holding the place for Joseph. Placeholders in history for Joseph's tribe until some undefined time far into the future, when Joseph's tribal name would rise up again and take preeminence. Now, I'm not going to go into it now, but if you compare the list of tribal names in the early scriptures here, and then there's more in, where is it, Ezekiel, I think, and then the tribal names are listed again to do with the city in Revelation, the tribal names change. The 12 tribes shift. You can look into that yourself. There's some interesting articles about that. Ephraim and Dan are not sealed, are not listed in the tribes in the Revelation, but we're not going to go into that right now. That's a whole video of itself. But Joseph comes back into the list of tribes in Revelation. That's an interesting thing. And Ephraim's not. Very interesting to look into all that. So Joseph's tribal name will come back again and take preeminence in the future. But there was yet another effect in these ceremonies. Joseph, by means of Ephraim, was receiving the double portion part of the firstborn blessing. What? He was receiving, by means of Ephraim, the double portion part of the firstborn blessing. Because remember, there was birthright and blessing. Birthright, you got to rule. Blessing, you got a double portion. Well, he gave the birthright to Judah. He was going to be the ruling tribe. And Joseph got the double portion through his two sons. This would happen a few days or months later when Jacob formally pronounced the firstborn blessing with all of his sons present. By Joseph becoming two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, this was the double portion. When Joseph's two tribes entered the promised land, they would each get territory. They would each establish wealth, and this would all be eventually ascribed, given to Joseph. So the double portion became double in the most literal possible way. Before we lose that point, let's have a look. Have a look at this map again. Judah's still pretty big. Judah was given the reign, the scepter. This is where the line of the kings came from, and Yahusha eventually. But let's look at Ephraim and Manasseh. Look at this land here. Now, knowing that this is one son, and this is all another son, wherever you see Ephraim and Manasseh, think Joseph. How much land did Joseph get given? All this here, and all over here, including Ephraim as well. All this. See how much he got? He got the double portion. He got way more than double than some of the other tribes, but he got more power. And remember, it wasn't just a matter of, okay, you couple of guys there got all this land. No, he had the people to fill it too. That's the point. It wasn't just land, it was people. So they had just, and there's numbers down later on we'll look at, but when you look at the population, Ephraim and Manasseh took up a huge part. And that's why later on in the prophecies about the two olive trees, Judah and Ephraim became the two dominant tribes, because through the prophecies and the blessing, Ephraim became the most dominant tribe. He just took on all this into himself. Anyway, move on. Since Ephraim was also pronounced as the firstborn by Jacob, leaving poor Manasseh, the oldest child of Joseph, to lose his traditional place of honour as the actual firstborn, then it was Ephraim's name who became the greater of the two brothers. Ephraim's name became the greater of the two brothers. And so when the scripture speaks in shorthand, as it often does, expecting the reader to know what it is abbreviating, it will say that Ephraim carries the rod of authority for the tribe of Joseph and says little about Manasseh. Interesting. So what we must keep in the back of our minds when reading the scriptures is that Ephraim is operating under the authority of the tribe of Joseph. Ephraim is operating under the authority of the tribe of Joseph, and that while Manasseh has become lesser in status than Ephraim, Yahusha has not forgotten about Manasseh. This especially comes back around in the tribal listings of Revelation that speak of the end times, and thereafter we mentioned that. So thus we've now come full circle. Judah was given the leadership of Israel, while Ephraim, in the name of his father Joseph, was given the double portion. This makes them the two most important tribes of Israel, and so they are the first to receive the blessing of land inheritance inside the promised land. And this is the subject of Joshua chapter 15 to 17 right here. So you got that? Judah and Ephraim are the most dominant tribes. Judah, land, and Ephraim got the double portion in the name of Joseph. Joseph got a double portion through his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and I just showed you how much land they got. It's a lot, wasn't it? But one more interesting thing is, on the east side of the Jordan River, Manasseh was one of the three tribes who took land possession there. What we're about to see is in these next few chapters of Joshua, is that Manasseh would also get another portion of land inside the promised land. I just showed you that. Manasseh would wind up with two portions of land. This fulfilled Yahusha's promise to Jacob, who had apparently followed Yahusha's divine instructions to him to elevate Ephraim to firstborn status above the elder Manasseh. So this fulfilled Yahusha's promise to Jacob of still giving mighty blessings at a later date to Manasseh, to make up for this undeserved removal of his rightful firstborn status. So Manasseh didn't miss out, did he? He missed out on his being the firstborn and the blessing, but what did he get? Look how much land he got. What status did Manasseh and Ephraim get through their father Joseph? I hope that all made sense. In a way that only Yahusha could orchestrate, Manasseh also received a double portion. In a way that only Yahusha could orchestrate, Manasseh also received a double portion. He received one portion of land inheritance on the east side of the Jordan and a second on the west side of the Jordan. And when we look back, we can now better understand at least one purpose for Yahusha permitting 2.5 of Israel's tribes to settle on the land outside the promised land. Nothing in this world happens accidentally. So are you understanding this? This is the chart that I had back in Genesis when we talked about Jacob's 12 sons. You can see now when they've come into the land that Joseph was favoured. He was the favourite son. And he was the firstborn as well. He was the firstborn of Jacob's favourite wife, Rachel. Reuben was the other firstborn son. He was pretty much booted out for his behaviour. He tried to usurp authority and take hold of his father's inheritance earlier, before he even died, by taking his wife. So he was kicked out. So Joseph was given how much land? He became, eventually, we've still got Ephraim and Manasseh here, but later on, this whole group of people, and like after the Civil War, they're just known as Ephraim. So, and they became the most dominant of the northern 10 tribes. In fact, they kind of took over all the tribes, and all those 10 tribes were just known as Ephraim. This was part of the blessing. They got the double portion. And of course, over here, we get the reign of the king, the bloodline of the kings. Firstborn birthright continuing. Judah, royal bloodline of the kings and Messiah. So, to me, it was very exciting because we're coming full circle from Genesis. These promises were given to Abraham and then to Isaac and to Jacob and Jacob's 12 sons. And we see that through their behavior, they received a different type of inheritance. Through your behavior, you receive a certain inheritance. So let's go to Manasseh's land. Manasseh was Joseph's oldest son, and Machir was Manasseh's oldest son. Machir had a son named Gilead, and some of his descendants had already received the regions of Gilead and Bashan because they were good warriors. The other clans of Manasseh descended from Gilead's sons Abiezer, Helek, Azriel, Shechem, Hepher, and Shemidah. Hepher's son Zelophehad, Hepher's son Zelophehad didn't have any sons, but he did have 5 daughters. So technically he wouldn't have inherited anything because they're just daughters. So one day the clans that were descendant of Zelophehad's 5 daughters went to the high priest Eleazar, Joshua, and the leaders of Israel and said, Yahuwah our Elohim told Moses that we are entitled to land, just as he gave our relatives. So Joshua followed Yahusha's instructions and gave land to these 5 clans as he had given land to the 5 clans that had descended from Hepher's brothers. So Manasseh's land west of the Jordan River was divided into 10 parts. Manasseh was supposed to have towns and villages inside the borders of Issachar and Asher's tribal lands, but they couldn't capture them, so the Canaanites kept on living there. When the Israelites grew stronger though, they made the Canaanites in these towns work as their slaves, but never forced them to leave. Seeing that a fair bit here, aren't we? They couldn't overcome them, so they didn't drive them out. They just lived among them or made them slaves. But what was the original instruction? Drive them out, destroy all the influences. This was a good point, just to put us in the right mindset here. Understand that the divvying up of territory to the Israelites was anything but clean and neat. Further, it was a long process. Because the scripture moves along at a very rapid pace, turning a page or going to the next chapter can be scores of years. Often only the barest of facts are given or the final outcomes are recorded in the shortest form. The reality is that tribal boundaries were constantly disputed, and some tribes didn't like the land they received and so easily gave some of it up and tried to acquire other land. Some tribes got up and moved entirely, and in other cases, boundaries expanded or contracted for various reasons. This went on for hundreds of years, and the details are not all recorded. So, I mean, it's great for us to look here in the 21st century and go, oh, look, see these sharp lines here? That's the boundaries. Not to these guys. They didn't have different, the ground wasn't different colours to them. No, they had to settle it and they had to, work it all out themselves. This is just an artist's impression based on what the scripture says of the boundaries. But you see what I mean? Human nature's like, I don't like that bit there, I'm going to take another bit. No, that wasn't the instruction, but they did what they wanted to do. So, one day the tribe of Ephraim and half of Manasseh that lived east of the Jordan came to Joshua and asked, why didn't you give us more land? Yahuwah has always been kind to us, and we have too many people for this small region. And Joshua replied, if you have so many people and not enough room in the hill country of Ephraim, then go into the forest that belonged to the Perizzites and the Rephaim, clear out the trees and make more room for yourselves there. But even if we do that, there still won't be enough land for us in the hill country. And we can't move down into Jezreel Valley because the Canaanites who live in Beth Shan and in other parts of the valley have iron chariots. That doesn't mean their whole chariots were made of iron. That just means that they were joined and plated with iron to make them stronger. In other words, they're powerful. They're afraid of them. Your tribes do have stacks of people, Joshua admitted, so I'll give you some more land. Your tribes are powerful, so you can have the rest of the hill country, but it's still a forest and you'll have to cut down the trees and clear the land. You can also have Jezreel Valley. Even though the Canaanites there are strong and have iron chariots, you can force them to leave the valley. Come on, guys. Iron chariots. What are you making? What are you making? Excuse after excuse. What happened in Jericho? So, let's go to 18. A few years after Israel had captured the land, they met at Shiloh and set up the tabernacle. Up to this point, the center of operations for Joshua and the Israelites had been Gilgal, where they had the big circumcision ceremony, which would eventually fall into Benjamin's territory. There, the wilderness tabernacle had been erected. The priests dwelled and officiated over the sacrificial rituals and service of the tabernacle. There, the Ark of the Blood Covenant Witness, with the portal of Yahusha, resided. But now, for reasons not given, Shiloh became the new headquarters and thus the seat of government. The land was under sufficient control to move the tabernacle to another place that was more central and convenient to the 12 tribes of Israel. But notice something. Shiloh was located in Ephraim's territory. Interesting. No doubt that Joseph's tribes lobbied hard to have the center of Israel in their family's territory. For although the site was central, there were many better and easier locations in the Shephelah or even in the low foothills. Shiloh is hill country, beautiful but rocky, craggy and not so easily accessible. Today it's what many call the West Bank. In scriptural terms, it's Samaria. The very area the tent was erected is visible to this day. Whoop-de-doo. The evidence of its presence is obvious. Even the holes bored into the rock where the posts of the courtyard perimeter curtains were set up can be found, and it's quite breathtaking to know that you're standing where the Ark of the Blood Covenant once was. So, they must have been, there must have been some interesting conversation going on there. Some hard lobbying to get the tabernacle, because imagine that. Imagine having the tabernacle in your tribal land. And it was Ephraim's tribal land. After a few years, there were still 7 tribes, but check this out. After a few years, there were still 7 tribes without any land. That's more than half. After a few years, there were still 7 tribes without any land. Why? So Joshua told the people, the tribe of Judah has already settled in the south, and the tribes of Joseph have settled up in the north. That's Ephraim and Manasseh. The tribes of Gad, Reuben, and half of Manasseh already have their land that Yahuwah's servant Moses gave them on the east side of the Jordan River. That's the 2.5 tribes out there. And as you know, the people of Levi won't get any region of land like the other tribes. Instead, they will serve Yahuwah as his set-apart priests. So what's the deal with the rest of you slack asses? None of you have done a thing to take over any land. Yahuwah Elohim, who your ancestors served, has given you your very own land as your promised inheritance. So go and settle in it. What's the problem? You getting this? 400 years in hard slavery, they're crying out for deliverance, crying out for a land of their own so they wouldn't be foreigners in someone else's land. And even before that, Jacob, Isaac, Abraham wanted a land of their own to stop being moving around and being Bedouins and everything. And typical, check out this younger generation here. Check out this younger generation. No care for what the older generations have been through and suffered and fought for and held as true and everything. And what's happening now? They're not even going in there. Oh, we'll just live out in our tents, stuff all this. This is nonsense. I'm not going to fight that. What's the deal with the rest of you slack asses? None of you have done a thing to take over the land. What's the problem? 7 of you tribes still haven't taken over your lands. So each of you 7 tribes should choose 3 men, and I'll send them to explore the remaining land. They were divided into 7 regions. Write a description of each and bring these descriptions back to me. Then I'll find out from Yahuwah our Elohim what region each tribe should get. Yeah, they love land, but they don't want to drive out other people from it. No way. So, no thanks, but no thanks. We don't need that inheritance. It sounds like a pain in the arse. So, Joshua's putting a firecracker under him now. Go and send 3 people into the land, explore it all out, write it all down. I'll find out from Yahuwah what each tribe should get. And just before the men left camp, again, Joshua repeated their orders. Explore the land and write a description of it. Then come back to Shiloh and I'll find out from Yahuwah how to divide the land. Don't forget, pull your finger out and do it. So the men left and went across the land, dividing it into 7 regions and writing a description of each, town by town, before returning to Joshua at the camp at Shiloh. And Joshua found out from Yahuwah how to divide the land, and he told the tribes what Yahusha had decided. And as we've discussed, the current generation of Israelites were more like Bedouins. They had no interest in trying to make land produce or in fighting over territory. Rather, they would just wander around with their flocks and herds from place to place, seeking fresh pasture and good water, living in tents, and would do everything possible to avoid conflict. Commitment wasn't in their vocabulary. Boundaries were to be crossed, not enforced. Permanently settling was not their goal, and it didn't fit the lifestyle they learnt during their 40 years out in the wilderness. So they're digging their heels in. They don't want to take their inheritance. They don't want to come into their inheritance. Keep all this in your mind, guys. This means something to us. We've been given an inheritance. Are we taking it? So then we come into Benjamin's land. Benjamin was the first tribe of the last remaining 7, that is, chosen to receive land. They were given their borders, and that's where their clans lived. There's Benjamin over here. So you can see just on another note, just how big Judah's land is. You can see why when there was a civil war, there really only became 2 houses in a sense, Judah and Ephraim. And you can see why. Ephraim's all up the top, and Judah, look how big it is. Anyway, that's Benjamin. Then we come to Simeon's land. Simeon was the 2nd tribe of the last remaining 7, chosen to receive land, and the region for his clans was inside Judah's borders, because Judah had received too much land for the number of people in its tribe. So part of Judah's land was given to Simeon. Check that out. How insulted would Simeon be? He hasn't even got his own border, really. Look at it. It's right smack bang in the middle of Judah. Let's talk about that for a minute, because this fulfills another prophecy as well. While Judah would certainly have been unhappy with the giving up of some of its territory to Simeon, in reality this was more of a slap in the face to Simeon. Surrounded completely by Judah, put Simeon in a very dependent situation. Essentially, this was the fulfillment of a curse pronounced on Simeon by his own father, Jacob. Cast your minds back to Genesis on the deathbed of Jacob. Remember after the bloodbath of Simeon and Louis, he said, I curse both of you, Simeon and Louis, for your wicked vendettas, the bloodbath in Shechem, and for your fits of rage, and both of you will be divided from Jacob and scattered throughout Israel. I think he also said, I just can't wait to die so I don't have to hear about what monstrosity you've gotten up to now. So anyway, what's the actual action? The curse? Both of you will be divided from Jacob and scattered throughout Israel. So both Simeon and Louis will be divided and scattered. That's what Jacob said. Here we see that Levi and Simeon were lumped together and given essentially the same cursed future. They would be divided and scattered in the promised land. Yet the way this came about for those 2 tribes was very different. Levi went on to become a very prestigious tribe, the priestly tribe. In fact, they were elevated in such a way that they were not even to be considered a tribe of Israel anymore. Hold that thought. Remember after the golden calf, and Yahusha's going to destroy them all. And Moses said, who's with me? And his fellow brothers and his tribe of Levi repented first and ran to Moses, and they became the priesthood. They were separated from the other tribes and not even considered a tribe. They're not one of the tribes of Israel. They are the priesthood. So they're not even to be considered a tribe of Israel anymore. Rather, they would be set apart for full-time service to Yahusha on Israel's behalf. Interestingly, The scattering prophecy for Levi was fulfilled in that they received 48 cities. So they've already been separated. Now they're going to be scattered. How are they scattered? We're going to see, I think it's in our next video. Levi was, this prophecy for Levi was fulfilled in that they received 48 cities with a meager amount of pasture land immediately outside of each city. But these 48 cities were not close together or connected in such a way as to form like a territory of Levi. Rather, they were dispersed all over Israel in all the tribal territories. And while the cities were technically owned by the Levites, in another sense they were only permitted to live there and control the city at the consent of the local tribes, not really theirs. They were scattered. The priesthood was scattered in their homes, where they were going to live, in the towns. Got that? So, was the prophecy true? Levi was indeed separated and scattered. They didn't get any outlined land. Simeon, on the other hand, was not scattered in the same way. At first glance, there appears to be no scattering at all. But when we look in the original text, we see that Simeon were given no actual described borders, only a list of cities and villages they could have. Though they were all located in a rather concentrated area within Judah's territory, it was to be a weak confederation of cities that caused Simeon to decrease in power and population, and eventually the tribe went into a steady decline over the centuries until there was no territory of Simeon at all. Judah took it over. Yahusha's word always comes to pass. So this is an artist's rendition here, but that black line here should not be there. You could have it as the lighter yellow because all Simeon's towns were in here, but they didn't have a border. When you look at the original text, there were borders given for most of the other tribes, but not Simeon. They didn't have any borders. They just had a few towns that they were given, and they're all in this area. So they were scattered as well, see? They weren't given the blessing of the other tribes. So, Yahusha's word always comes to pass. You understand that now on Jacob's deathbed when he said to his sons, Judah, the line of the kings, the scepter, the royal scepter, which he'd lost, remember, he gave it to Tamar as a proof, deposit almost. You're going to keep your inheritance and your status. But he said to Levi and he said to Simeon, you're going to be cursed. Can't stand you anymore, what you've done to my family. You're going to be separated, divided and scattered. And it happened. So then we have Zebulun, Issachar, Asher and Dan's land. Dan's land. Then the tribes of Zebulun, Issachar, Asher and Dan were given the borders of their promised inheritance, and that's where they lived. Later, when enemies forced Dan to leave their tribal land, they went to the town of 𝐿𝐴𝐴, attacked the town, captured it and killed the people who lived there, settling themselves and renaming the town Dan after their ancestor. The tribe of Dan received the seventh and last lot, a sure sign of its status in the eyes of Yahusha. As quickly as the territory is described, we are told that the territory was not large enough for them. And this fits well with the earlier census that showed that Dan was among the largest tribes of Israel. Therefore, they looked for more territory and thus went far to the north of Canaan and conquered a place called 𝐿𝐴𝐴, changing its name to Dan. Dan was having it tough right away and they knew it. Judah was forced to give up some of its westernmost towns and Ephraim some of its southernmost towns in order to form the territory of Dan. Neither of the two most prestigious tribes of Israel would have liked that very much. Judah and Ephraim would not have liked that. Worse, the major unspoken for area Dan was given was the central and southern Mediterranean sea coast, which was currently occupied by the fierce, formidable and technically advanced sea people, later called Philistine. Much of the tribe of Dan elected to switch rather than fight, and thus the interests of many of their clans in moving well north. The capturing of 𝐿𝐴𝐴 probably seemed like a great thing for Dan, but it turned out to be a slippery slope. Pagans surrounded them, and Dan quickly adopted their ways. In fact, Dan is known for being the tribe that first succumbed to the surrounding nations, which they were supposed to drive out and fall back into idolatry. Pagans surrounded them, and Dan quickly adopted their ways. The northern city territory of Dan became a centre of Yisraelite idolatry, and calf worship was mixed in with the worship of Yahusha. So we'll see mention of Dan in the scripture reduced to near nothing over time, except when it was invoked as a curse. And he won't really re-enter Yisrael's wonderful prophetic future until late in the prophetic process. This explains why in Revelation, and I'm not going to touch on it too much, Dan isn't even in the list of tribes that are sealed. Dan and Ephraim aren't even there. Well, Dan just fell straight back into idolatry, back into the world. And what happened to Ephraim? Ephraim got scattered into the world and became religious and, worldly. They don't know who they are. They lost their identity. The Israelites were still gathered in Shiloh in front of the tabernacle when Eleazar the priest, Joshua, and the family leaders of Israel finished giving out the land to the remaining tribes. Finished giving out the land to the remaining tribes. Yahusha had told the people to give Joshua whatever town he wanted. So that's the least they could do after all this, isn't it? So Joshua chose Timnath-Serah in the hill country of Ephraim, because he was an Ephraimite, and the people gave it to him. So Joshua went there, rebuilt it, and lived there. Remember earlier in our episode we talked about how Caleb was from the tribe of, he was an outside, but he was in the tribe of Judah. And Joshua was from the tribe of Ephraim. So what do we have there? The only two men who made it into the promised land from the first generation were from the tribe of Judah and Ephraim. And what do we just learn about those two tribes? They were given the birthright and the double portion blessing. There are a couple of important principles being demonstrated in this arrangement. First and most important is that Yahusha completed what he said he'd do to Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. And what he'd do is give Israel a land of its own. Second is that Joshua was obedient and did all that Yahusha instructed. Interesting, isn't it? So that has finally been done. They've finally got given their land. According to their behaviour, the 12 tribal monarchs, the 12 tribal leaders, the sons of Jacob, according to how they behaved prophetically, is how they ended up and how much inheritance they received. But on that note, and I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but this little area here, I think, where is it? Yeah, this little area here is this map here. No, this map here. This here, where the 12 tribes of Israel were, is this bit here. Just a little bit in there. That's the little bit of land we're dealing with here. See here? But what I wanted to say is the boundaries that Abraham was promised is all this green area here. So what does that tell you about Israel's behaviour? Did they ever inherit the land that Abraham was promised? They didn't even keep hold of their own little portion here for very long because of their behaviour. They did not receive the full inheritance of what they were supposed to get. Oh, you could step back and go, oh well, Abraham had many children and they weren't all what considered, Isaac and Jacob and all that. He had other sons. He had the line of Ishmael and he had other sons as well. So maybe those sons technically maybe Abraham did inherit all that, but we're not looking at it on that level. My point is just because of their behaviour, they never really inherited this, did they? Even though it was promised. And what do we know about Yahusha's promises? He always gives them if you play your part, if you behave. So, because I didn't write all the land boundaries and everything, you can see there, you can look at that in your own time if you want. But you can see just how big the tribes were. These two tribes were huge. So if you include Ephraim and Manasseh together, who were the two biggest tribes? Judah and Joseph. So that's just another map again. Things of interest. 3 sons of Noah, where they sort of ended up. Shem, Ham and Japheth. I'm not going to go into all that. We've been on long enough now. Let's kick this point home, guys. This amazing article came up a few weeks ago and we're going to go into it because I think it's all about inheritance, really, and how to claim your inheritance now. Because the inheritance back here was land, and where is the promised land now? We are the promised land. And how much of it is being conquered is up to us, isn't it? To behave a certain gift from Yahusha is a very different behavior than behaving the 9 fruits. Because a gift is obviously from Yahusha and is impossible to refute because it happens miraculously. A gift is something Yahusha gives you. He might make you work on it and train you in it and everything, but it's basically something that he's given you and not someone else. It's a gift. Fruit is something that has to grow almost from nothing. The 9 fruits, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, trustworthiness, gentleness, self-control, they have to grow in us. That's how we perfect. But a gift is something that is handed to you. It might be something that you once used in your former life that Yahusha's now taken hold of and said, this is a gift, I'm going to use you in it. It could be something that you never knew how to do before, but through his anointing, through his inspiration, he gives it to you. It's a gift. This is the direction all of us should be aiming for in order to step into the inheritance Yahusha has for us. The 3 rules will help cleanse, heal, and deliver a person. Then catapult. What? The 3 rules will help cleanse, heal, and deliver a person in your mind, in your body. Then they'll catapult them into the spiritual realm where the battle is being won. How can the 3 rules catapult you into the spiritual realm? Because they reveal the spiritual realm. They reveal all the behaviors of everybody around you, and mainly, because you've got to put them on yourself, they reveal what's happening inside you. And that's where the spotlight has to focus. It reveals what influence. It reveals the pagans and the wickedness and the Canaanites that are in your promised land that need to be driven out. So the battle can be won. Just like Joshua, we are called out to be trained to fight the set-apart war for the hearts and minds of Yahusha's chosen men and women who are emerging from the filth and disgust of this world's infested wickedness. Once we've been through the training of Hebrews 12, flogging, chastising, rebuking, disciplining, goading, that's a real experience. We're all having it. But after a while, if you choose to be obedient, you don't feel that pain. Once we've been through the training of Hebrews 12, we start to experience peace with Yahusha and are well equipped to bear the fruits of clean, obedient behavior. Astounding gifts will then manifest from the trained ones, and this is the warfare where Yahusha guides his chosen into victory. It's not about bubby emotions. We're not in the playground anymore. We're in battle. We're using the gifts manifesting from the trained ones. This situation is available to all believers, men and women of obedience. We are urging men and women of Yahusha to take up their staff and follow Yahusha's promptings, because the gallery of those surrounding us, standing in the doorway trying to block our entrance, are just ridiculous with no understanding. So we just put the 2nd rule to their behavior. Let them have it. Anyone standing in your way, balking you, interfering with you, coming into your sphere, coming into your news feed, coming into anything to do this, that, or the other, just put the 2nd rule and let them have it. And pursue the Master's voice, who we can actually hear and act on in obedience. We can actually hear the Master's voice. But are you acting on it in obedience? This is not religious behavior, because we have direct access to Yahusha through our circumcised portal. That ties in with the promised land, doesn't it? They all had to be circumcised, and there was a priesthood and there was a portal, and covered with goat skin and covered with this, covered with gates, covered with everything, a priesthood guarding it. It was a portal. It was the interdimensional portal between worlds, between dimensions. We have direct access to Yahusha through our circumcised portal. All gifts and fruits must be proved before any mantles are raised. In other words, what you say must come to pass. And this is your proof. Makes sense? You can't just say stuff after the fact. Oh, I knew that was going to happen. Yeah, but did you say it? Did Yahusha tell you to declare it beforehand? Because if you didn't, you can't say things after the fact. Oh, I knew that would happen. No, you didn't. You can't claim it. Let him have it. What you say must come to pass, and this is your proof. Even though we're still in our flesh, did you know that you can come into your inheritance? Which is really just Yahusha anyway, isn't it? He's everything. On all facets, all levels of interpretation, everything that Scripture is about, the living word, the portal, it's all Yahusha. You can come into your inheritance now, and not just wait around in agony until he returns, suffering and pining and depressed and upset. But that's okay, because we're in the great tribulation. We're in the great tribulation. So we're allowed to be depressed. We're in the great tribulation. No. Tribulation just means pressure. Aren't you getting used to pressure? You got pressure out in the world. So if you run away back to your own vomit in the world, you've still got pressure. I'd say much more pressure, if you ask me, particularly after you've known the love of Yahusha. So we don't have to wait in agony until he returns. His peace, his presence, the end of strife and disobedience, and end of the war within. Just like Joshua's now experiencing a lull, an end to the war. We can have an end to the war because your vessel, the promised land, has been sold over, conquered, and all the evil has been driven out. Now in Joshua, we're starting to see that all the evil hasn't been driven out, and it's going to come back later on to bite them in the ass. But for the most part, a huge portion has been conquered to the point where they've got peace and enough to subdue and keep an eye on those that they haven't driven out yet. Same with us. There are still things in us, claws of religion maybe, claws of the world, tentacles of past relationships, friends, you name it. Let's just put it all under the banner of the world. There's still the world in us, and it has to be driven out. Yeah? Because that's how Satan comes to us. The dragon comes to us through the influences of the world, and they have to be driven out. And the more we drive out, the more peace we have. And anyone who tries to move back into your land, into your heart, into your life, into your vessel, just hold. Anyone who tries to move back into your land, take hold of just a small piece of divine set-apart property through conversation or confrontation, are politely, or maybe boldly, ushered, driven away. Drive them out through using the 3 rules, which keep our boundaries strong and defences on high alert. How do the 3 rules keep our defences on high alert, our boundaries strong? Because they reveal the enemy. They reveal the evil in every situation through our clean behaviour. If you are practicing clean behaviour, letting everybody don't take anything they say personally, just let them it doesn't matter. Not that important. Is it worth an argument? Is it worth even a discussion half the time? Let them have it. Yahusha's working, and if he's not working, what are you going to do about it? If Yahusha's working, he's working. You don't need to don't make excuses for yourself. Don't lie. This behaviour shows up the evil, because when someone's not doing it, it sticks out there. This sounds like the beginning of Yahusha's inheritance to me. I mean, I'm not saying it's the fullness of the new Jerusalem and the renewed dimensions and all that sort of stuff. I'm not saying anything like that. But I'm saying this is the beginning of our inheritance, guys, and we can come into it. Because We've got the portal. It's open doorway. We can partake of him. So, are you experiencing him like this yet? You can come into this if you want to, if you believe it's true for you, or do you just want to have religious behavior and pretend? Because it doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't mean anything. If you're a miserable cuss, face it and work out why. And it's always going to be some form of idolatry, some form of worldliness inside you, some form of behavior that you're doing that Yahusha doesn't like. And if he doesn't like it, he'll show you. So that was a long one today, guys, but I just found that fascinating. The fruition, Yahusha's word, it never comes back void. When he says it, it's going to happen. Even the deathbed prophecies, look how they came to pass. And look how some of the sons got next to nothing. And some of the sons, because of their behavior, were given almost everything. Which do you want to be? Do you want to be a son of great inheritance, a daughter of great inheritance? Or do you just want to just be getting the food scraps from the table, the crumbs and nothing? Get yours, brothers and sisters, and run your race. It's all up to you to come into the maturity, to come into the perfection. So go and do it. Believe it and have it. Come into your inheritance.